What's the most mysterious event you've ever experienced that still gives you chills? Story 1. You know how you can identify people you've lived with for years by footsteps? Well, my dad had Parkinson's for over 20 years. Parkinson's affects your ability to walk and thus causes a shuffling when trying to initiate movement, like what happens in the beginning of this vid. Unfortunately, my dad was a very stubborn individual, so he never listened to how the doctors told him to properly walk. What he would do is try to initiate walking without any walker, which would always be a rapid shuffle, lose balance, and then fall on his knees with a bang. He would then get up, start shuffling again, fall on his knees with a thud, and repeat until he finally started walking. As you can imagine, his knees were in terrible condition and were swollen to the size of bowling balls. I heard this series of shuffling and thuds every day for my entire life. Well, he unfortunately passed away in 2015 due to complications from surgery. A month after his passing, I was upstairs in my room browsing my computer, and that's when I heard that same series of shuffling and thuds I had heard so many times before, coming from downstairs. It went on for a couple of seconds and stopped. I was home alone and nearly crapped myself. I went downstairs and saw no one there. Story 2. A couple of weeks after my mom died, I was driving home from work, feeling very sad and a bit angry. I was pissed off at the universe for leaving me alone. I have no other living family left. She was the last. I was thinking about how we both loved birds and would always point them out to each other, and I thought, if all that hippie spirituality stuff mom loved is real, then the least she could do is send me a bird, maybe, as a kind of sign. It was a long drive, and I saw no birds at all. I thought, of course it isn't real. What a silly thing to think. I didn't see so much as a robin or a wren or anything. I parked and walked down the path to my house. While I was putting my key in the door, something colorful caught my eye. I turned. There, at the end of the path, was the most astonishing bird I've ever seen. Every color of the rainbow, a bright yellow and gold head, scarlet chest, iridescent blue back, orangey or gold wings, black striping. It was jaw-dropping. It was the size of a chicken, but a bit taller, with a long tail. It just stood staring at me. I started to laugh, and it got spooked and flapped away over the fence. I lived in a large city, which made it even weirder. My neighbor came outside and saw it too, so it wasn't a hallucination. I got into the house and started Googling colorful birds of that size and shape, and eventually found it. It was a Chinese golden pheasant. What the hell? There were no bird sanctuaries or zoos nearby. I never saw it again. I took it as my mom, rolling her eyes at my cynical rejection of her hippie spirituality stuff, saying, "You want to see a bird? I'll send you a bird." It was so great. Story 3. I think I posted this story before, but when I was in high school, my sister and I were in the kitchen together. I was planning to make a cake, so I got 3 eggs out of the fridge and placed them on the counter. I turned away from the eggs, talked to my sister. We both heard the distinct sound of the eggs rolling off the counter and splatting on the floor. We whipped our heads around at the same time, but the eggs were just sitting there, back on the counter. Only supernatural thing I've ever experienced. So minor, but so odd. Story 4. I was sitting at a red light on a 2-lane road. I was in the right lane with a big pickup truck blocking my view of the highway I was waiting to cross. My daughter, 6 months old, is in the car seat in the back seat. The light turned green and I heard a distinct female voice say, "Wait!" It wasn't the person in the pickup because all the windows were closed. The pickup next to me didn't move. 2 seconds later, a semi ran the red light at high speed. Had I proceeded through the light, I would have been obliterated. It haunts me to this day, 40 years later. I had a similar but less spooky experience. The light turned green, but for some reason I just didn't feel like going. I sat there for a second or so just staring at the light and seeing it was green, but choosing not to drive. And the car behind me didn't honk, which I also found odd. As I sat patiently stopped at the green light, someone driving perpendicularly blasted through their red at 60 plus. Intuition is a strong force, I guess. Story 5. I had a dream that I was in an Irish airport with 2 women. Neither I'd ever seen, but both were distinct in their own way. One was very bird-like with shock blonde hair. The other woman was heavyset and wore a head bandana. I remember wondering why I dreamed about it. In any case, I wrote it down in my dream journal. We ate at an Italian restaurant that had a neon sign with spaghetti and meatballs. Fast forward 55 years to me being out of school, and I get sent on an emergency trip to go fix an issue at a site in Ireland. Network broken, HPUX box not booting. It was fun. They sent along a couple of the women who wrote some of the ERP software and needed to work with some of the staff to iron out kinks. It was those women. The bandana was because she'd just completed chemo for breast cancer. The other woman had shock blonde hair and was 50 pounds soaking wet. We ate at that damn restaurant with the neon sign. I sat there aghast eating my chicken. Nothing like it has ever happened since. Story 6. I was raised in Texas, not far from Louisiana. Playing with my younger sister and cousin in my grandmother's driveway, I was around 11 years old. The driveway, which could accommodate 2 cars, was crossed by a bird or something similar. and its shadow stretched several feet on either side in addition to the driveway's whole width. My grandma started yelling at me to go get the baby. Each of us grabbed a kid and hurried inside. I asked her what was wrong because she was shaking and looking pale. She claimed not to know and never having seen anything. My grandma is a very practical and undramatic person. I still don't know what was flying over her driveway. I gave it some thought once. Story 7. One summer, my friend and I decided to go camping in a remote area of the forest. On the second night, we both woke up to the sound of footsteps around our tent. We figured it was an animal, but the steps were too heavy and deliberate. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on a tree nearby, like someone hitting it with a stick. We called out, but there was no response. After a few tense minutes, the noises stopped. The next morning, we found human footprints circling our campsite, but they led nowhere. We never figured out who or what was out there, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. Story 8. Many years ago, me and my mom and dad were quietly watching TV in the lounge when an almighty crashing sound came from the kitchen. Dashing out there, we fully expected to be running up the road after the yob who'd bricked our kitchen window. But the window was intact, and no heavy pan had slid off the cooker or fallen off shelves or hooks. Everything looked exactly as it should. Until, that is, we opened one particular cupboard containing various piles of plates, etc. In one stack, several plates, all positioned quite randomly in the pile, were found to be smashed to pieces as surely as if hit with a hammer, whilst the rest of the plates were completely undamaged. Mum sobbed quietly to herself as she explained that the broken plates had all been brought back from her mum's home, my nan's, following her death some years previous. The incident had happened on Man's birthday. Story 9. Years ago, my wife and I were staying at a hotel on the coast with a beachfront view. Very late into the night, maybe sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., we were both on the porch looking out at the ocean. Something strange started to move along the beach. It was hard to see at first because it was vague and transparent, but after a minute or two, it became the unmistakable image of two people dancing together. Except, the image would disperse like a cloud of blue, luminous, swirling vapor suspended in the air, and then coalesce again into the dancing human form. It did this multiple times. As it traveled across the beach, we both saw it and remarked on it while it was happening. It was a clear night, and we were both stone cold sober. We stared in awe at this thing for a solid 5 minutes or so before it eventually dispersed without reappearing. To this day, we have no idea if it was purely an optical illusion, actual people paired with some atmospheric effect, or something beyond either of those. Story 10. Guess I wrote this on Reddit before. I went out for dinner with my best friend and her boyfriend. Out of nowhere, I got heavy problems with breathing, fast heartbeat, cold sweat, and so they brought me to the hospital. The doctors didn't find anything, and after about 1.5 hours, the symptoms went away as abruptly as they had started. Didn't think about it any until 2 days later, my uncle found my mother, who was obviously choked to death on her dinner. She lived alone, and we all thought she had a lot of work because she didn't answer the phone for some days. He decided to look after her when she didn't show up to his invitation for New Year's Eve because there was no natural death. Don't know if this is the right term in English. It means that there could have been other. A coroner had to examine her. He limited the death time to 2 days ago, somewhere between 7 and 11 p.m. Well, I think you can guess which time span I went to the hospital with symptoms that are quite similar to the ones she must have had. Story 11. When I was little, my family and I were coming back from a movie night. We drove down a pretty wooded road. While we were on our way, we saw a glow in the sky. When I pulled my head out of the car, I saw what looked like a fiery sphere in the sky with multicolored halos. I remember the fireball was orange, but it changed to a reddish color, and then, out of nowhere, it disappeared. To this day, I have no idea what I saw that night. I've searched for information on possible explanations, and many people tell me that maybe it was a case of ball lightning or pollen coronas, but none of those explanations resemble what I saw. Story 12, I achieved a huge professional milestone, talking massive, and I was so happy. That night I dreamed that all these women came to my door. At the front of the crowd were three of my grandmother's cousins who I hadn't really known, but they were all nodding and smiling at me. I looked behind them, and there were just rows of women. I know they were all relatives who came to congratulate me. I come from a long line of poverty, mill workers and so forth in the UK. My achievement was huge because it broke literal centuries of poverty. I always think about that dream. Story 13. This was in the early those. My roommate and I were watching TV and having wine and snacks. She got up and went to the kitchen to get some more snacks. When she turned around, suddenly I looked around and we were having a party. There were loads of people there, and a whole fancy setup with high tables downstairs and a full bar. I was entertaining the guests and passing out snacks when suddenly everything went back to how it had been before. A regular night with my roommate and I, both in sweatpants, having wine and snacks in the living room while watching TV. She looked at me and said, "Where did everybody go?" We compared notes. We'd seen the same thing. Story 4. I'm a deep skeptic, but when I was a child, I was doing a 12 Days of Christmas event where we would doorbell ditch neighborhoods with themed gifts. This was in northern Arizona, out at one of the neighborhoods that was at the edge of the desert. We were making a turn with me and my friends in the bed of the truck, and we saw a man crouched down at the end of a cul-de-sac, right under the streetlight, and I immediately assumed it was a homeless man. But I wondered why they were so far away from the city. Then I realized he was crouched directly under the light, and he was just a dark silhouette. As we were driving away, he stood up and walked in two separate directions. I swear it. One turned into two separate strides in incongruous directions, and there was an ugly dread in my gut, like deeply primal. And I turned to my friend to make sure he'd seen what I'd seen, and his face fell, and he quietly said, "I have to go home, right now." My friend was Navajo and believed he'd just seen a skinwalker, and to this day I wouldn't have a solid argument. Story 15. I was really sick and had a team of doctors to resolve a serious health issue. It was awful hearing worst case scenarios, to the point my parents didn't go with me because they spent most of the time getting consoled by me. One day, after being offered a hospital chaplain counseling, which I declined, I felt the warmest feeling come over my entire body. Not hot or uncomfortable, it was comforting like a warm blanket and a voice in my head saying, I would be okay. The urge to cry was so great that I had to hold my chest and close my eyes. It was the most comforting and peaceful thing ever. I ended up with the least bad diagnosis and recovered after a couple years. Story 16. I was staying with my grandmother for a couple days, just visiting, and me and my fiance were sleeping in her guest room. We kept having weird, scary dreams and feeling really uneasy. At night, I would have these dreams, visions of an evil man and woman kind of lurking in the shadows. One night, I was asleep, and all of a sudden, I could feel a hand over my mouth and nose suffocating me. In my sleepy state, I thought it was my partner being weird. He does weird things in his sleep, but suffocating is not one of them. LOL. So I pinched the crap out of him. He yelped from pain, which both made us fully wake up. He asked me why I pinched him so hard, and I said, because you were trying to suffocate me. He said, no, I was not. We didn't sleep very well for the rest. To this day, we fully believe some sort of spirit had placed its hand over my mouth and nose and restricted my air. We haven't slept in our house since. Story 17. Maybe not as crazy as other stories, but this just happened. Wife is pregnant, and we hadn't told anyone the name of the baby. We had just decided on a name which wasn't that common. We hadn't told anyone. We had a babysitter over for a date night. We have a 3-year-old, let's call him Tommy, and the babysitter was just making small talk and correctly guessed our unborn baby's name. She said something like, when baby Abby comes, she will love to play with Tommy. There was no way she could have known the baby's name would be Abby. I got goosebumps. I asked her how, and she said she just knows stuff sometimes. Psychic babysitter wild. Story 18. Everyone was having dinner on New Year's, next door neighbors included, and we were talking about lost loved ones when suddenly there was loud stomping running up the stairs. We all stopped and stared, and the toddler started crying, and my mom made me and my uncle go up to check it out. I didn't see anything, but I got goosebumps and a horrible sense of dread. None of us can explain it. Oh, actually, the strangest one. I used to live next door to two parents and their son, the same ages. We got on well, and I was around a lot until I moved away, and we kind of lost contact. Anyway, a few years later, like 10 years later, I had a dream that I was sitting in their living room, just me, the son, and the dad. We were sitting there just having a nice chat, and it was a really comfortable and friendly atmosphere. Such a chill vibe. Nothing even happened. We were just catching up and enjoying the moment. When I woke up, I felt really emotional, and I went on Facebook with the intention of messaging the son for a catch-up, when the first thing I saw was his Facebook status saying that his dad passed away that night. I can't explain it. That was the only dream I ever had about that family, and it happened the same night the dad died. To me, that's crazy. Story 19. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I hated getting my hair cut, and my dad had told me he was going to do it the following day. Fast forward to about 9 p.m. or so, I had gone to bed and was lying on my stomach. Mind you, I had a plastic Darth Vader mask that hung on a bedpost at the head of my bed. I'm trying to sleep, and I pick my head up for whatever reason, look at the back of the mask, and seeing the reflection of a blacked-out male figure at the foot of my bed, with long hair down to its shoulders, holding a pair of scissors, opening and closing them. A sense of fear consumed me, yet I had the courage to look back, and it was gone. I ran out of my room, and my mom said I was as white as a ghost and started crying. She sent me back to bed with a Bible and a cross pendant necklace. Story 20. I posted about this before, but I'm positive my dead mother visited me in a dream when I was 10. It happened the night after her funeral. Now, I'm in this dark room in the dream. I'm wandering around and stuff, just checking things out, when all of a sudden my mom and a bunch of other deceased relatives appeared in front of me. My mom is in the middle of them all. My mother's saying her goodbyes and waving to me, and my reaction was to try and reach out to her. Then I'm suddenly dragged away from her by something, and a bright light shoots down to where my mom is standing, and the dream ends there. I woke up crying and I was pretty torn about it. Story 21, to this day, I still can't figure out if I was dreaming or not. I vividly remember being in bed and having an urge to go upstairs to the kitchen area where there's a door to a small balcony. Since I was scared to go directly to the balcony, I went to the toilet, which has a small window that points to the same direction of the balcony. And then I remember seeing more light than usual. Curiosity got the best of me, and I rushed to the balcony and saw four UAVs spinning very closely to the houses just above. I mean, I could literally see the metal shapes and the door in the thing. Then they stopped, and without noise, in 1 to 2 seconds, they were gone into the mountain, hovering for hours there. I was going into bed, then coming out again just to check. Around 6 a.m., my mom was on the other balcony that has a more limited view of the mountains. They were still there, and we started to hear F-16 passing by. This detail is what makes me think this was not a dream, since that day everyone was talking about being woken up by the jets but not knowing why. Story 22. My mom and I have a weird psychic connection at times. Two-time really weirded me out. The first time, I'd gone to an acquaintance's grad party and wasn't having a great time. I sent my mom a text asking her to come pick me up and got a reply almost immediately. She told me in the car that she had been working in the garden outside for a long-ass time when she suddenly felt the need to go inside and check her phone, which was right when I sent her the text. Second time freaks me out way more. I had just gotten into a car accident. My fault, I was the only one hurt and it was minor whiplash. I called her in a daze to ask for help. She had apparently gotten a horrible feeling that I, specifically, and not my sister, had gotten hurt and was grabbing her keys and going into the garage to come find me at the same moment I called her. These don't happen often, but when they do, it makes me question some crap. Story 23, had to get a glass of water in the middle of the night. To give a bit of context, one side of our house was just a wall of tall windows so you could see the whole garden. This wall of windows extended to our kitchen area as well, where I had to get my water. I lived in the Philippines, where it was normal to have security guards 24/7. While getting water, I was looking outside to the garden, and I could see our guard, dressed in his navy blue uniform, standing and facing our house with his arms behind his back. This was around 2, 3 a.m., but I was more impressed than creeped out because our previous guards slept during these hours instead of doing their job. On the way back to my room, though, you could see our main gate through the windows, and there I saw the guard on a chair snoring away, wearing a white t-shirt and navy blue pants. I shrugged it off as me imagining that I saw the guard in the garden, but to this day, I still remember it so vividly and consider it as my only supernatural encounter. Story 24. Not chills necessarily, but still unexplained. A few years ago, we had a Wednesday bus that would come once a week on the early Wednesday. It was a small van, more like a car, and me and 5, 6 other students would get in and be taken home. If we ever left anything on the Wednesday bus, we would have to wait a week until the next Wednesday to get it back because this man didn't come back to the school or clean up crap. One day I lost my phone on the Wednesday bus, and the next morning my usual bus driver had it on her bus. Normal until she tells me, "This was just here this morning. I don't know who it is." It was definitely my phone, and I asked the Wednesday bus driver if he gave it to her, and he said he didn't. Maybe just a weird-ass mix-up. But I have no idea how my phone, which I was certain I lost on Wednesday, I was using it for music, ended up on the second bus Thursday morning before any students got on.